Hello and welcome to the Fighting Moose podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Jason Hendrickson. This is a podcast where I retell stories, some fictional and some historical, that can be enjoyed by people of all ages. Today is an exciting day, at least for me anyway. Today I get to use my new laptop to create today's episode. It's so nice. The speed is fast. There's a lot more memory available for storing my data, and I got everything I needed downloaded, mostly pain-free. So if things sound a little different, or seem different, which hopefully it doesn't, that is why. So today, we read chapters 31 to 35 of Bowser the Hound, written by Thornton W. Burgess. Now as we come near the end of winter and get ready for spring, take some time to enjoy the weather when it's nice out. There's nothing like a little sunshine to help perk up the spirit. Now, let's turn to today's story. I hope you enjoy. Let's begin.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Chapter 31. Blackie is much pleased with himself. You cannot tell from a single feather what a bird looks like, nor from a lone hair how big a dog is. Bowser the Hound. Straight away, towards the farm where Bowser the Hound was, flew Blackie the Crow. Every few minutes he would caw encouragement to Reddy Fox, who, as you know, was following, but who of course could not travel as fast as did Blackie. In between times, Blackie would chuckle to himself. He was mightily pleased with himself, was Blackie. In the first place, his plan was working beautifully. You know, what he was after was to get Reddy Fox over to that farm where Bowser was. He hoped that if Reddy should catch one of those fat hens, the farmer would put Bowser on Reddy's trail. He knew that Reddy would probably return straight home, and Bowser, following Reddy's trail, would thus find his way back home to Farmer Brown's. Of course, it all depended on whether Reddy would catch one of those fat hens and whether Bowser would be allowed to hunt him. Blackie had a plan for making sure that if Reddy did get one of those hens, the folks in the farmhouse would know it. But what tickled Blackie most, the knowledge that Reddy Fox thought he was fooling Blackie. You remember that Reddy Fox had pretended to be very weak. Blackie knew that Reddy was nothing of the kind. At the very first opportunity, Blackie stopped in the top of a tall tree as if to rest. His real reason for stopping was to have a chance to look back. You see, while he was flying, he couldn't look behind him. Presently, just as he expected, he saw in the distance a little red speck, and that little red speck was moving very fast indeed. There was nothing weak or feeble in the way that red speck was coming across the snow-covered fields. Blackie chuckled hoarsely. Nearer and nearer came the red speck, and of course the nearer it came, the larger it grew. Presently it stopped moving fast. It began to move slowly and stop every once in a while as if to rest. Blackie laughed right out. He knew then that Reddy Fox had discovered him sitting in the top of that tall tree and was once more pretending. It was a sort of a game that Blackie thoroughly enjoyed. As soon as he knew that Reddy had discovered him, he once more spread his black wings and started on. The same thing happened over again. In fact, Blackie did not fly far this time before once more waiting. It was great fun to see Reddy suddenly pretend that he was too weak to run. It was such fun that Blackie quite forgot that he had had no breakfast. Yes, Blacky the Crow was very much pleased with himself. It looked very much as if he would succeed in helping Bowser the Hound. This pleased him, but it pleased him still more to know that he was fooling clever Reddy Fox while Reddy thought he was the one who was doing the fooling. Chapter 32. Blacky Waits for Reddy. Be wise, my friends, and do not fail to trust a dog who wags his tail. Bowser the Hound. Just before reaching the farm where the fat hens and Bowser the Hound were, Blacky waited for Reddy Fox to catch up. It was some time before Reddy appeared, for he wasn't traveling as fast now as when he had started out. You see, that farm really was a very long way from the old pasture where Reddy lives, and Reddy had run very hard because, you know, he was so anxious to get one of those fat hens. As soon as Blacky saw him, he hid in the thick branches of a tall pine tree. Reddy didn't see him. In fact, Blacky had been so far ahead that Reddy had lost sight of him some time before. Out of the bushes trotted Reddy. His tongue was hanging out just a little, and he was panting. Blacky was just about to speak when Reddy stopped. He stood as still as if he had suddenly been frozen stiff. His sharp black ears were cocked forward, and his head was turned just a little to one side. Reddy was listening. He was listening for the voice of Blacky. You see, he thought Blacky was still far ahead of him. For several minutes, Reddy stood listening with all his might, and Blacky's sharp eyes twinkled as he looked down, watching Reddy. Suddenly, Reddy sat down. There was an expression on his sharp face which Blacky understood perfectly. It was quite plain that Reddy was becoming suspicious. He had begun to suspect that he had been tricked by Blacky and led so far away from home for nothing. Down inside, Blacky chuckled. It was a noiseless chuckle, for Blacky did not intend to give himself away until he had to. But when at last he saw that Reddy was beginning to get uneasy, Blacky spoke. "You seem to be feeling better, brother Reddy," said he. "You must excuse me for keeping you waiting, but I did not suppose that anyone so weak and feeble as you appeared to be early this morning could possibly get here so soon." At the sound of Blacky's voice, Reddy was so startled that he jumped quite as if he had sat down on a prickly briar. He was sharp enough to know that it was no longer of any use to pretend. "I'm feeling better," said he. "The thought of those fat hens has quite restored my strength. Did you say that they are near here?" "I didn't say, but—" Blacky didn't finish. He didn't need to. From the other side of a little swamp in front of them, a rooster crowed. That was answer enough. Reddy's yellow eyes gleamed. In an instant, he was on his feet, the picture of alertness. "Are you satisfied that I told the truth?" asked Blacky. Reddy nodded. Chapter 33. Reddy Watches the Fat Hens. Sooner or later, the crookedest trail will straighten. Bowser the Hound. At the sound of that rooster's voice on the other side of the little swamp, Reddy became a changed fox. Could you have been sitting where you could have seen him, as did Blacky the Crow, you never would have guessed that Reddy had run a very long distance and was tired. He did not even glance up at Blacky. He did not even say thank you to Blacky for having shown him the way. He looked neither to the right nor to the left, but with eyes fixed eagerly ahead, began to steal forward swiftly. Making no sound, for Reddy can step very lightly when he chooses to, he trotted quickly through the little swamp until he drew near the other side. Then he crouched close to the snow-covered ground and began to steal from bush to bush until he reached the trunk of a fallen tree on the very edge of the swamp. To this he crawled on his stomach and peeped around the end of it. Everything was as Blackie the Crow had said. Not far away was a farmyard, and walking about in it was a big rooster, lording it over a large flock of fat hens. They were not shut in by a wire fence, as were Farmer Brown's hens. Some were taking a sunbath just in front of the barn door, others were scattered about, picking up bits of food which had been thrown out for them. A few were scratching in some straw in the cow yard. In the barn, a horse stamped. From the farmhouse sounded the voice of a woman singing. Once the door of the farmhouse opened, and an appetizing odor floated out to tickle the nose of Reddy. Reddy looked sharply for signs of a dog. Not one could he see. If there was a dog, he must be either in the barn or in the house. It was quite clear to Reddy that no fox had bothered this flock of fat hens. He was sorely tempted to rush out and grab one of them at once, but he didn't. He was far too clever to do anything like that until he was absolutely sure that it would be safe. So Reddy lay flat behind the old tree trunk, with just his nose and his eyes showing around the end of it, and studied what would be best to do. He was sure that he could get one of those fat hens, but he wanted more. Early that morning, Reddy would have been quite contented with one, but now that he was sure that he could get one, he wanted more. If he were too bold and frightened those hens while catching one, they would make such a racket that they would be sure to bring someone from the farmhouse. The thing to do was to be patient until he could catch one without alarming the others. Then perhaps he would be able to catch another. Reddy decided to be patient and wait. Chapter 34. Patience and Impatience. Patience is a virtue in a cause that's right. In a cause that isn't, it's a cause for fright. Bowser the Hound. One of the first things that the little people of the Green Forest and the Green Meadows who hunt other little people learn is patience. Sometimes it takes a long time to learn this, but it is a necessary lesson. Reddy Fox had learned it. Reddy knew that often even his cleverness would not succeed without patience. When he was young, he had lost many a good meal through impatience. Reddy could not remember when he had been more hungry than he was now. Lying there behind the fallen tree, watching the fat hens walking about unsuspectingly just a little way from him, it seemed to him that he simply must rush out and catch one of them. But Reddy was smart enough to know that if he did this, there would at once be such a screaming and squawking that someone would be sure to rush out from the farmhouse to find out what was going on. If he were discovered, there would be small chance for him to get another fat hen. Reddy is keen enough to make the most of an opportunity. He knew that if he could get one of those hens without frightening the others, he would have a chance to get another. He might have a chance to get several in this way. So though he was so eager and so hungry, he made himself keep perfectly still while he studied out a plan. By and by, he stole ever so carefully around back of the barn to the cow yard. Some of those fat hens were scratching in the straw of the cow yard. Just outside the cow yard was a pile of old boards. Reddy crawled behind this pile of old boards and then crouched and settled himself to be patient. He knew that sooner or later one of those fat hens would be likely to come out of the cow yard. In this way, he might be able to catch one without the others knowing a thing about it. Blackie the Crow sat in the top of a tall tree where he could see all that was going on. Blackie was as impatient as Reddy was patient. "Why doesn't that red rascal rush in and get one of those fat hens?" muttered Blackie. "What is the matter with him anyway? I wonder if he is afraid. He could catch one of them without half trying, and there he lies as if he expected them to run right into his mouth. I don't want to sit here all day, yet I can't do a thing until he catches one of those hens. So Reddy waited patiently, and Blackie waited impatiently, and the fat hens wandered about unsuspectingly, and for a long, long time, nothing happened. Chapter 35. Things Happen All at Once. The cleverest fox is almost certain to visit the chicken yard once too often. Bowser the Hound. Jolly, round, bright Mr. Sun, high in the blue, blue sky, looked down on as peaceful a scene as ever was. In the cow yard, back of the barn of this particular farm, stood several cows contentedly chewing their cuds as they took their daily airing. Half a dozen fat hens were walking about among them and scratching in the straw. Out in the farmyard, in front of the barn, were many more fat hens. Behind a pile of old boards, just outside the cow yard, was a spot of red. In the top of a tall tree, not far distant, was a spot of black. The smoke from the chimney of the farmhouse floated skyward in a lazy way. Looking down on the great world, jolly, round, bright Mr. Sun saw no more peaceful scene anywhere. By and by, a fat hen walked over to the bars of the cow yard and hopped up on the lower bar. There she sat for some time. Then, making up her mind that she would see what was outside, she hopped down and walked over to the pile of old boards. Right then, things happened all at once. That red spot behind the pile of old boards suddenly came to life. There was a quick spring, and that fat hen was seized by the neck so suddenly that she didn't have time to make a sound. At the same instant, the black spot in the top of the tall tree came to life, and Blackie the Crow flew over to the roof of the barn, screaming at the top of his lungs. Now those who know Blackie well know when he is screaming, "Fox, fox, fox," although it sounds as if he were saying, "Caw, caw, caw." In a moment, the door of the farmhouse flew open, and a man stepped out with a dog at his heels. The man looked up at Blackie, and he knew by Blackie's actions that something was going on back of the barn. Right away, he guessed that there must be a fox there, and calling the dog to follow, he ran around to see what was happening. Of course, Reddy heard him coming, and with a little snarl of anger at Blackie the Crow, he seized the fat hen by the neck, threw her body over his shoulder, and started for the nearby swamp as fast as his legs could take him. Just as Reddy reached the edge of the swamp, he heard the roar of a great voice behind him. He knew that voice. It was the voice of Bowser the Hound. It could be no one else but Bowser who was behind him, for there was no other voice quite like his. Dismay awoke in Reddy's heart. He knew that Bowser was wise to the tricks of foxes, and that he would have to use all his cunning to get rid of Bowser. To do it, he would have to drop that fat hen he had come so far to get. Do you wonder that Reddy was dismayed?
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fighting Moose Podcast. Please join us next time as we read another exciting story. Today's music was provided by the artist Grapes, and the audio clips were provided by NASA. For more information, to contact us, or to download podcast extras, please visit www.thefightingmoose.com. Also, if you haven't done so, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for your patronage, and as always, try and do a random act of kindness every day.
Mission complete, Houston. After serving the world for over 30 years, the space shuttle's earned its place in history and it's come to a final stop.